sand dunes of Amargosa stand about 300 feet tall from the base. Walking up the dune is fairly hard. The steep uphill walk is complicated by the fact that the sand is stacked as steep as sand can be structurally stacked. Every step sets off 1,000 tiny avalanches, and the big step that you just took settles just a few inches ahead of your previous footing. You aren't making forward progress as much as you are churning up the sand beneath you, but inch by inch, churning and burning, you move upward. My shoes got so full of sand that I had to undo the laces to slip them off. I abandoned them halfway up the dune. No matter what happens on the hills, one must always remain completely hydrated. Otherwise, your lips might get trapped. From this vantage point, you can barely make out the tiny dot that is my motorcycle. As I crawl my way up the sand dune, I noticed a tiny dot that seemed incredibly out of place. It turns out this tiny dot was a bullet, shot from a gun, probably. It had interesting rifling marks. I wonder if the person shooting the bullet hit what they were aiming at. If they were aiming at the sand dune, they did. A last scramble across the sand brings us to the very peak, only to find that the other side is actually steeper than the side that I went up. Walking to the summit along the crest is easier than walking up the side, but it is still fairly difficult. Stepping off the crest even by a few inches makes your feet sink into your knees. It's like tiptoeing across a bazillion tiny avalanches. One of the funnest things to do on the entire planet is to jump from a high point to a lower point and know that your landing is going to be extremely soft. I call it the Geronimo effect, and it is awesome. The climb back up, however, is extremely brutal. The sand feels like velvety silk wrapping around my leg as I climb onward to the summit. It's almost fun now, nearing the top. The excitement you feel when you get to the top of a mountain is equal to the amount of pain and drudgery that you had to go through to get there. And whenever I get there, I always look around and think to myself the words of Sir Edmund Hillary, the first guy to ever summit Mount Everest. He said, "We never really get to conquer any mountains, but every once in a while, if we're lucky, we get to stand at the top for a little bit." To those that are lucky enough.
Geronimo, bitches! Geronimo!
And now I am completely and totally exhausted. I am about 100 miles away from my water. The headache is actually starting to creep in. Let's see if we can make it back to camp, shall we? It took a grueling 20 minutes to get back to where I left the water bag, so I decided to take a little nap. I wrapped my face in my shirt and lied down for a little siesta on the top of the sand dune. Walking back down the sand dune was, I would say, the complete opposite of walking up it. And this is evident in the footprints that I left. You can see that the footprints coming up the sand dune were almost on top of each other, inches apart, whereas the footprints coming down the sand dune were almost 6 feet apart. Not counting the 8-foot double hops. I just picked up my shoes and kept on a-running. When I got to the base of the dune, I put my shoes on. Feet 100% exfoliated. Bye-bye, Amargosa sand dune. Time I go bye-bye. Once I reached the camp, I realized that I had to actually sit outside the tent because being inside the tent was still extremely hot. To keep the sand out of my ears, I put socks over them. The socks worked perfectly to keep the blowing sand out of my ears, but made it a little awkward when some dudes came by, wondering if I had any water. Apparently they had gotten their truck stuck in the sand some ways off, and had heard my offering to the gods, and come over. I tried to show them how I was able to keep my body temperature down by wetting my shirt in the ice cubes, spreading the shirt over my face, but by the time I had removed the shirt from my face, they were already on their way out, yelling something about needing to call a tow truck. I wondered if they would be able to survive, like I would, in the post-apocalyptic zombie world that we were now living in. Good morning, friends. This is what it looks like when you wake up in the middle of nowhere. It's goddamn beautiful. But we can't bask in this too much. There's a lot more world out there to see, and I intend on seeing it. But first, we've got to put some clothes on. Because people are always less awkward when you meet them wearing clothes.